Sometimes when you have a guy like me that's been into health, into fitness, into supplementation, into good food since I was about 16, you follow these trends in health. They go up and down, they go up and down. And what ends up happening is we get lured away sometimes into paying for this supplement that we think is magic and is going to do this, is going to do that, and is going to do that. I came up with a little joke this morning. We're going to be talking about vitamin D with one of the world's authorities, if not, in my opinion, the world authority on vitamin D that's dedicated his life, demystifies, myth busts in such an incredible way. And I believe by the time we finish, your opinion of vitamin D, like mine, is going to be plain as the sunburned nose on your face. But this guy does not advocate tanning your face or getting sunburned. We'll learn a lot more about that. We have Dr. Michael Holick, a world authority on vitamin D, with us, a Boston University guy. And Michael, would you, first of all, welcome to Ultralife Today, and would you just take a few moments, because I know you could spend the next hour talking about all the scientific research papers that you've authored and co-authored over the years and some very interesting things that you've done in your life. Tell us a little bit about you.
So, I'm professor of medicine, pharmacology, physiology, biophysics, and molecular medicine at Boston University School of Medicine. And I started my career at the University of Wisconsin back in 1969 in the Department of Biochemistry. And people always ask me the question, why did you get involved in vitamin D? And the answer is, I had zero interest in vitamin D. I was a graduate student in the biochemistry department, and just like all other students, wanted to work in the hottest area, which like in DNA was just discovered.
Right.
But all of those positions were filled. So they sent me over to see Dr. DeLuca, who was working in vitamin D. And my response was, I have no interest in working in vitamin D. And the response back to me was, it doesn't matter what you're interested in. This is what you're going to be working in. And it turns out that I was very fortunate, because originally it was thought vitamin D was boring, right? It was prevented rickets in children. It's in milk. But now we know a lot more. And I happened to be in the right place at the right time. So I'm the one that, for my master's degree, that took me 3 months of research to identify the major circulating form of vitamin D is 25-hydroxyvitamin D. That's the vitamin D when you go and get your blood test done by your doctor.
Yep.
I was the one that discovered that. And then I went on to discover the active form of vitamin D, which is 125-dihydroxyvitamin D. Why is that important? Because your kidneys make it. And we then began to realize that patients with kidney failure had severe bone disease because they couldn't activate vitamin D. I'm also an organic chemist. And so my roommate and I were the first to chemically
the
make it.
The phytoplankton experiment, right?
Yep.
Yep.
And took us 2 years. And we made enough material that we were able to give it to renal failure patients, kidney failure patients, and showed that the severe bone pain, being wheelchair bound, they started walking again.
Incredible.
That was my introduction into translational medicine with vitamin D.
Wow. So impressive.
Then I became fascinated with vitamin D being the sunshine vitamin. And I wanted to understand how you make it. And so we'll be talking about that in some of the questions that you're answering, that I'll be answering. But also what was curious to me was that your skin cells, your epidermal cells, had a receptor for active vitamin D. Now, why would they be there? Because it has nothing to do with calcium and bone metabolism. And we showed that it was a major regulator of cellular growth. And I put my MD hat back on and I asked the question, is there a practical value? And the answer was psoriasis. So we introduced the concept in the 1980s of topically applying active vitamin D for treating psoriasis. And I've been having fun in the vitamin D field ever since.
Yes, you have. You've been a pioneer and an innovator for sure. So let's just bring it home for people that have heard about vitamin D all their life. quasi believe it's a necessity. They've never been consistent about taking it. We want to move through some questions to help people have a practical plan to be able to say, I know how to measure my vitamin D. I know how much I need for sufficiency. I know what it's going to do for me. So the carrots are all dangling in front of me for this potential for its life-giving benefits. So what role do you think vitamin D plays in our overall health? And why is it important for people to maintain adequate levels of vitamin D? As you call it, vitamin D sufficiency.
Right. So vitamin D basically is necessary from birth until death. We now know that preeclampsia, the most serious complication of pregnancy, is associated with vitamin D deficiency. Using important muscle function for birthing, vitamin D plays a critical role in improving muscle strength. And we showed in over 200 of patients at our hospital that if moms were vitamin D sufficient, that they had a much less likelihood of requiring a cesarean section.
Incredible.
We also know that if mom is vitamin D sufficient during her pregnancy, her infant, as they're developing teeth, are less likely to develop dental caries. They're also less likely to develop wheezing disorder. There's good evidence that if you are vitamin D sufficient during your first 10 years of your life, that you have much less risk of developing type 1 diabetes and multiple sclerosis later in life. There's good evidence that vitamin D deficiency is associated with infectious disorders, including COVID-19.
Yep, we'll cover that later.
It reduces risk for cardiovascular disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, neurocognitive dysfunction, among other important health benefits for your skeleton. So for children, vitamin D deficiency will not permit them to maintain their maximum height that's genetically programmed for them. They can develop rickets early on. For adults, they develop two types of bone disease. The first is that because you're vitamin D deficient and you can't get enough calcium into your body, the body takes it out of your bones. So it removes calcium and matrix from your bone, causing a hole and basically decreasing your bone density. But what it also does is that it causes a mineralization defect of any newly laid down collagen matrix. And as a result, not only aren't you able to mineralize new bone, but that collagen matrix is like jello, it hydrates. And so patients complain of throbbing, aching bone pain. They feel it when they're lying down, when they're sitting, when they're standing. They can't understand it. They're often misdiagnosed as having fibromyalgia when it's in fact osteomalacia.
You know, when listening to so many of your different lectures you've done all over the world, one of the things that continually hit me in the face is this gentleman, Dr. Holick, has pioneered so many different studies. I was like a kid in a candy jar listening, but I realized very quickly, wait a minute, many of the things that my friends suffer with, that I've seen my parents suffer with, relatives suffer with, colleagues, coworkers suffer with, are probably related to the simple fact that they're vitamin D deficient. I never knew vitamin D covered so many health bases, and I know you've actually been one that's literally done studies on the fly at times as you were learning things about vitamin D. So it's not a vitamin, is it? Where does it come from? Who discovered it?
Sure. So, vitamin D has been made on this planet for well over 500 million years. We showed that the earliest organism, phytoplankton, had the ability to make vitamin D. We believe that vertebrate evolution was caused by the fact that vitamin D helped to be able to increase calcium metabolism for developing a vertebrate skeleton. And we now recognize that as early in the 1800s that there was an association with sunlight and rickets. And then finally, it was Dr. McCollum who did the ultimate study. They knew that cod liver oil had anti-ricketic activity. He oxygenated it and heated it to destroy the vitamin A activity, which was thought to be the cause for having anti-ricketic activity.
Interesting.
And when the vitamin A was gone, he realized that there was a new vitamin. And as a result, he named it vitamin D. But you're correct. Vitamin D is produced in your skin from exposure to sunlight. And it has to go to your liver and to your kidneys to get activated. So therefore, by definition, it's a hormone.
So lifestyle, geographic location, skin pigmentation, all of these things play a radical role. You're in an area of the world, Boston, where my daughter went to college. Two of my daughters went to college there. And Boston is like a wasteland for vitamin D deficiency, isn't it? Tell us a little bit about this idea of geographic location and lifestyle and how that plays into vitamin D sufficiency.
Well, basically, vitamin D deficiency is a worldwide problem. And it's a very simple reason. It's because Mother Nature designed us for our skin type and for our latitude to be able to make an adequate amount of vitamin D. And as a result, there is very little vitamin D in your diet, right? Oily fish like salmon, mackerel, herring, mushrooms exposed to sunlight, cod liver oil. Those are the only three major natural sources of vitamin D.
Breast milk doesn't even have much vitamin D in it, does it? I learned that from you. I was shocked.
Yep, it has 100 international units. It helps to prevent rickets in children, but will only barely help you with your vitamin D status.
Wow.
And it will definitely not make you vitamin D sufficient.
Interesting.
I mean, the Endocrine Society practice guidelines, and I chaired that committee. We recommended back in 2011, infants need 400 to 1,000 units a day, children 600 to 1,000 units a day. And in my opinion, teenagers should be treated like adults, 1,500 to 2,000 units a day. And if you are obese, because the body fat will dilute your vitamin D, you need 2 to 3 times more.
Wow. So what's this connection, because you mentioned it over and over in different lectures I listened to of yours, about vitamin D and the parathyroid hormone, and what's that connection there?
So they're intimately related. And so the function of vitamin D is to maintain your blood calcium and phosphate. And it does it by regulating the efficiency of your intestine to absorb calcium and phosphate. If you're vitamin D deficient, you only absorb about 10 to 15% of your dietary calcium.
Wow.
Not enough. But with vitamin D, about 30 to 40%. If you're pregnant, lactating, growth spurts, the body immediately recognizes this, activates more vitamin D. So the efficiency of calcium absorption in the intestine can be as much as 80%. Parathyroid hormone also is a monitor for your blood calcium. And so it has a sensor in the glands in your neck, the parathyroid glands, and it's constantly monitoring your blood calcium all the time. And if the calcium starts to go down a little bit, the parathyroid hormone level goes up and it goes to your kidneys. It tells the kidneys to conserve calcium. And it also tells the kidneys to activate vitamin D, because more active vitamin D and then increase the efficiency of calcium absorption. And as a result, if none of those work, then parathyroid hormone goes to the skeleton and it will induce cells to release hydrochloric acid and enzymes that destroy the matrix to take out the calcium and to put a hole in your bone. So vitamin D and parathyroid hormone play a critical role in maintaining your calcium and phosphate metabolism. When you're vitamin D deficient and parathyroid hormone is continuing to go up, and you can no longer satisfy your calcium requirement. Another thing happens that is not appreciated, which is parathyroid hormone causes you to lose phosphate into your urine. Why is that important? Because, like making concrete, where you need adequate cement, sand, and water, to make bone mineral, you need an adequate amount of calcium and phosphate. So if your phosphate level goes down, you have what's called an inadequate calcium phosphate product. And as a result, any of the new collagen rebar that's being laid down in your bone cannot be mineralized. And that's what causes osteomalacia.
So we have established then that worldwide there's vitamin D deficiency, that where a person lives plays a profound role of the lack of exposure to sunlight. You're a person that preaches consistency, especially with this 2,000 to 3,000 international units a day of vitamin D for an individual. You said something really fascinating that I loved, and that was, I'll sum it up this way. It is a horrible idea to think about vitamin D as a therapeutic intervention, even though I do want to cover that with you. You're literally saying from the time a baby is in a mom's womb, that mom has got to be vitamin D sufficient. That will set that child's life on a course. But even babies, you recommend vitamin D, because we've got all these people out here, as you know, very scared about toxicity and vitamin D. And yet I really think it's important. We've got so many young mothers out there, so many wanting to become pregnant in this world. Mention the baby dosing of vitamin D and how important that is, because as you stated earlier, the lack of vitamin D in breast milk is a real thing. So show us how to keep a child from conception, through 10 years old, healthy and at a good vitamin D level.
So even the American Academy of Pediatrics recognizes that human breast milk contains very little vitamin D. Now, you may ask the question, why would Mother Nature do that? And it turns out Mother Nature does not do that. There's good evidence that, in a very nice study done by Bruce Hollis and Carol Wagner, if you give lactating women 6,000 units of vitamin D a day, they put enough vitamin D in their milk to satisfy their infant's requirements.
Oh, nice.
What that's telling us is that our hunter-gatherers outside every day were making thousands of units of vitamin D, putting it into the breast milk and satisfying the infant's requirement.
Right.
But we don't do that anymore. And so as a result, infants, minimum should be 400 units a day, especially breastfed infants. The American Academy of Pediatrics urges that. The Endocrine Society practice guidelines, looking at all of the data, recommends 400 to 1,000 units a day. Now, why up to 1,000 units a day? Because there was a study done in Finland decades ago where they were very concerned about infants being vitamin D deficient because of lack of sunlight, right, 6 months of the year. And so they started giving them 2,000 units of vitamin D a day. They then followed those infants for 31 years and showed it reduced their risk of developing type 1 diabetes by 88%.
That's incredible. So now you're linking this. I know we're going to cover some of these other topics about diabetes and stuff. That in itself just blows my mind. So what are some practical Dr. Michael Holick recommendations for the average person to take control of their vitamin D deficiency and turn that into a sufficiency?
Right. So I'm often asked, so do I need to take it during the summertime? And should I only take it in the wintertime? And my recommendation is to take it all year round, the same dose, because this way you'll guarantee sufficiency. We did a study with Quest Diagnostics and looked at over 2 million blood samples.
Wow.
And looked at blood levels every day of the year in the South, Midwest, in the middle, of the U.S. and northern U.S. and showed that the only change in your blood level is about 9 from winter to summer. And so, and we showed that even for those individuals, they never reached what we consider to be sufficient at 30 nanograms per ml. Their average was around 29 nanograms per ml at the end of the summer. So my recommendation is to all of my patients to follow at least the Endocrine Society practice guidelines of taking 2,000 units a day. I personally take 7,000 units a day, and my blood levels around 72 nanograms per ml for 25-hydroxy vitamin D. Most of my patients I had on 3,000 to 5,000 units a day. Talking about toxicity, it turns out that vitamin D is probably one of the least toxic compared to vitamin A vitamins. There's very good studies to show that infants, like I said, taking 2,000 units a day, there was no evidence of any toxicity. In adults, the Endocrine Society recommends up to 10,000 units a day is the upper limit without having to be concerned about toxicity. You literally have to take tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of units of vitamin D a day for months to years before you have to worry about vitamin D toxicity.
Wow, myth busted there. That is phenomenal to hear the world's expert on vitamin D say that. Well, and here's the next question for us. You're the one that discovered it. How does one simply measure their vitamin D levels to know they're in that sweet spot? And by the way, I have to interject this. Our company, Ultra Botanica, is connected with hundreds of key opinion leader, integrative functional medicine doctors around the globe. And I still hear them when they're reading a vitamin D test say, oh, the person's fine if they're at 40. Oh, not my patients. My patients should be at a 60. I hear others saying, if I've got them at a 60, why would I not put them at an 80 if they're not going to get toxic? So tell us about taking a vitamin test, what they can get their doctor to order for them. I know it's very inexpensive because I've done it myself. And then how often should they do that test? And later on, we're going to talk about a mobile app that you helped pioneer that will literally help people. They can download it for free, and they can literally basically use that as a guide to know that they're vitamin D sufficient. So the test, how often, and these levels, you hear people, it's all over the map, doctor. Please demystify that for me, because I hear this from doctors all the time.
So, as you said, you want to order 25-hydroxy vitamin D. That's the vitamin D test. And the Endocrine Society practice guidelines recommends that for vitamin D deficiency, the number is less than 20 nanograms per ml. 21 to 29 nanograms per ml is considered to be vitamin D insufficient. And a 25-hydroxy vitamin D of 30 nanograms per ml and above is considered to be sufficient. However, because the assays can vary in terms of their accuracy, the Endocrine Society recommended that the preferred range is 40 to 60 nanograms per ml.
Okay.
Now, whether or not being 70 or 80 or 90 is going to make any difference, we don't really, in my opinion, have enough information to say that. However,
good to know.
I did do a study. And
imagine that.
Yeah, which is that if you put an adult, a vitamin D deficient or insufficient adult, on 600 units a day, as recommended by the Institute of Medicine, or 4,000 units, or 10,000 units a day, for 6 months, and look at their white blood cell expression of genes, what was amazing was even on 600 units that you had about 150 genes that were being regulated.
Amazing.
On 4,000 units a day, about 300. But on 10,000 units a day, about 1,200 genes were being up and down regulated, and that they controlled more than 80 different metabolic processes, from DNA repair to apoptosis to help in controlling cancer to oxidative stress improvement, among others, including immune function. So my recommendation to my patients has been 40 to 60 is a very good range. And I don't think 70 is going to make that much difference. I happen to be at 72.
Okay.
But up to 100 is considered to be the upper limit, and I think is quite reasonable. If you want to be at a higher level, there's really very little evidence of toxicity.
Beautiful.
The only concern you have to have is sometimes in some people, they're a little bit more sensitive, where they have a high calcium intake, that they could develop more calcium in their urine and potentially increase risk for kidney stone. But in my opinion, based on the literature, vitamin D, improving their vitamin D status does not increase risk for kidney stones unless you've had one.
So when it comes to supplementation, I've never heard you mention things like K2, MK7, nor have I ever heard you say you should take oil when you take your vitamin D supplement because it's going to help with absorption. And by the way, let's throw this in as well. Your research has revealed that it takes about 2 solid months, right, to get those vitamin D levels up if you're in the basement. But with the levels that you recommend taking of vitamin D, you can get them there in about 8 weeks. Is that true?
Correct. And what's interesting about vitamin D, it doesn't have to be in the basement, right? Actually, if you're in the basement, right, really low, like 10, when you take even a tiny amount of vitamin D, you have at least 2 different enzymes in your liver that will make 25-hydroxy-D. And so one of them immediately starts converting. And so you will begin to rise very quickly into around 15 to 20.
Nice. Okay.
But after that, you need about 100 units to raise your blood level by 1. In terms of, do you have to take it with a full meal, with a fat meal? The answer is no.
Okay.
Because we did the study and showed that vitamin D is bioavailable in orange juice.
Phenomenal. Interesting.
And so as a result, you could take it on an empty stomach, full stomach, doesn't make any difference at all.
And K2, MK7, tell us about those, and is there a reason that an individual really needs to supplement with those alongside vitamin D? And if so, do you take them together? Do you take them apart? How do you do that?
Right. So Dr. Jerry Reeves and I have a book on nutrition and bone health. And we had one of the world's experts, Dr. Booth, write about vitamin K. I mean, we know that vitamin K got gamma carboxylates proteins, and there's 2 in your bone, including what's called osteocalcin and osteonectin. But the argument on the internet is that vitamin K helps to absorb vitamin D or helps vitamin D work in your intestine. In my opinion, there's no evidence for that.
Wow.
Also, in my opinion, based on the literature, is that it's suggested that if you take vitamin K2 or 7, that the calcium that you're absorbing from your gut intelligently knows to go to your bone and not to your blood vessels. To me, I mean, I'm sure vitamin K is smart, but I don't think it's that smart. And so I've never been a proponent of recommending vitamin K. I don't mind my patients. Many of them are taking it, and I have no problem with it. But in my opinion, unless you have a poor diet and you are vitamin K deficient, I don't think that you need to be taking a vitamin K supplement.
Very interesting, because, boy, there's a big push out there for people to do that, is there not? You're a proponent of internal vitamin D supplementation as well as sunlight. So if a person has an opportunity based on a location, and that's why your mobile app is so brilliant, but you, for the record, you are a proponent that it's great to enjoy Mother Nature, to get out there. Now, my understanding is you think that exposing the face to sun is probably not a great idea. I heard you mention that, no, you don't do sunscreen before you go out in the sun. You expose maybe the arms, maybe the chest, maybe the legs as well. And then you get this certain amount of time. And then if you want to put sunscreen on, do that then. Tell us kind of quickly how that works.
Sure. So first of all, sun protection factor of 30 sunscreen, properly applied, I think it's 2 milligrams per square inch, will reduce your ability to make vitamin D in your skin by 97.5%.
Okay.
It's just by definition.
Yep.
And so if you put on the sunscreen properly, it will do that. And I always try to wear a hat, for example, to protect my face. It's only 4% of your body surface, so it doesn't really provide you with vitamin D.
Okay.
Tops of your hands, the same thing, are the most sun exposed. And so time of day, season, latitude, degree, and skin pigmentation, which we briefly talked about. That app, dminder.info,
Yep.
dminder.info,
Yep.
it will tell you anywhere on this planet, basically, because of the satellite telling how much UV is coming to the Earth's surface. When you can make vitamin D, how much vitamin D you make for your skin type, and warns you to get out of the sun so you don't get a sunburn.
Nice.
And so I'm typically asked, right, by reporters, so how long do you stay outside? So I say, look, if I know I'm going to get a mild sunburn after 30 minutes outside on Cape Cod in June at noontime, I would be out there for 10 or 15 minutes.
Right.
That translated, unfortunately, to the message. So you can go out 10 to 15 minutes anywhere on the globe, and you can make an adequate amount of vitamin D.
And you're historically talking about those maybe 11 to 2 or 11 to 3 in the afternoon as being kind of the peak times, right?
And we showed that even if you are in Panama at 8 o'clock in the morning with the sun shining brightly, you make no vitamin D.
Wow.
It's only you begin at around 9 o'clock, abruptly end at around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So usually 11 to 2 is ideal, but 10 to 2 is okay. You just never want to get a sunburn.
Okay. You've written an amazing book called The Vitamin D Solution, which off air you mentioned to me is still actually very current. I know you always have your nose to the grindstone with more research. You're so hungry for that, and I love it. But The Vitamin D Solution is a book that our viewers can get anywhere. Highly recommend that. You want to reach out and touch base with Dr. Holick. Of course, Facebook, Dr. Michael Holick, MichaelHolick. And then the very best website to connect with him is drmichaelholick.org. That's drmichael.org. Hey, we're going to keep moving forward in this and do some more. Looking forward to it.